The planet's puppet masters almost surely have a plan. There's clearly maybe something there beyond the realm of man. And until we've thoroughly tested every last close-chested view, I find the more we think we know, the less we really do. The Higher Side Chat Show, Greg Carlwood and Company.
Who you gonna call, Higher Side Chatters? From the Sunshine State, I'm Greg Carlwood. And whether or not you've had a high strangeness contact experience, there's no shortage of personal testimonies that should convince anyone willing to explore it with an open mind that some sort of intelligent, conscious, seemingly separate beings can and do weave in and out of our reality quite often. And for those yet to be convinced, one needs but only pick up and ingest any of the available options in a range of entheogenic contact devices, develop a deep and intentional meditation practice to explore greater reality, say the right words at the right time from the right grimoires, or some even report that simply asking can often invite a hi there and hello from something we're told shouldn't even exist. Gods, spirits, fairies, demons, ghosts, aliens, or archons, it matters not which road you take, but the acknowledgement of these things have caused many of us to rethink our models for a greater reality, consciousness, spirituality, and existence outside of our life on the current timeline, which also affects the ways in which we think about technocracy, transhumanism, AI, and the idea of a singularity. Are the drivers of this technology motivated by spiritual beliefs not always advertised? Might they have already mapped greater reality with an intention to hijack it and cut off humanity from our tether to the higher realms? Are we even sure these ideas, drives, and technologies are even their own? Well, it's hard to know where you're being taken if you don't even know where you are, but thankfully we have a new book by Dr. Joanna Kujawa that explores and explains these very things, titled Alien Goddess, UFOs, AI, and the Goddesses of Ascension. You might remember her from an interview we did a few years ago related to her other book, The Other Goddess, Mary Magdalene and the Goddesses of Eros and Secret Knowledge, as well as from her spontaneous sexual kundalini experience story and how that might relate to a feature of the divine feminine and a major motivation for the big machine to suppress it. For those who don't know, she's been an active academic for over 20 years, using her scholarly training to investigate topics other academics often pass over, such as what is the nature of UFO experiences? And might there be a connection between AI, UFOs, and the esoteric goddess traditions of Inanna, the Eleusinian Mysteries, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and the Pistis Sophia? Funny, I was just wondering that myself, so let's get into it. Deep diving academic advocate for the goddess and spiritual detective extraordinaire, Dr. Joanna Kujawa, welcome back.
Thank you, Greg. I love that introduction. Excellent. Thank you.
I don't make it easy on myself, but I am psyched to do this again. Our last interview really stuck with me. I reference it fairly often. And when you let me know about this new book, Alien Goddess, and that it was written in response to Diana Pasulka's encounters, at least in part, I was all primed and ready to go. I love her first book, American Cosmic, mainly because of that initiation into the invisible college thing and the drip, drip, drip of information. But that second book, Encounters, did kind of take a hard right turn into AI and technology and away from maybe cosmic, multidimensional, liminal contact. And it kind of almost did focus more on a techno-religion sort of thread that was going through it. And so I liked that one a lot less. But what are your thoughts? So let's get into what your book argues in response to that second book of hers, Encounters.
So first of all, thank you for saying this, because I'm also a big fan of Diana Pasulka. And when I was reading Encounters, there are parts of this that I really like. And then we got to the interview with a transhumanist, or actually posthumanist, a name of Simone, or Moon Lady. And then as I was reading this, we got to a certain point when I felt that my soul was crushed. Like I felt actually almost like I encountered something very strange, and I don't want to use it because I don't want to attach it to a person. I want to attach it perhaps to a particular ideology. I realized that this is not against a person. It is actually my feeling was directed towards this ideology, and I had to process it. Almost, I'm reluctant to say it, but something almost evil, really energetically low. Because I always look into esoteric traditions, Kundalini and heretical traditions, I thought, what is it? Why I start to behave like a holy inquisition, right? Like this is evil, right? Because this is what they would say, right? Like this is right, this is wrong. I don't want to be like that. So I had to go through the process, and then I thought, okay, this is not against the person. This is not against anybody. Like, for example, the person who was speaking I am really concern about particular ideologies behind artificial intelligence. And I was so concerned that I actually wrote to Professor Diana Pasuka and I said, look, I love you, I love your work, but I have to figure it out for myself and share it with others because this is how I actually feel about it. So I was very open about it. So what is it that really crushed my soul? Because I felt like that. For the first time, I felt like...
Before you go on, we will cut this out, but I'm hearing it's a little bit of a rustling that wasn't there before. You're standing, right? You're not, there's no desk you're touching.
Oh, maybe I touched the desk. Yes.
I think it might. Okay. That's usually what it is. I can tell from the sound. It sounds like the cord is hitting something or you're touching the desk. So sorry, try to touch the desk a little less, but we'll stitch this together and take this part out, but you were just going to get into the part that kind of gave you that soul crushing feeling.
Yes. So it really, I felt that my soul was crushed. So what was it? So I realized that this particular spokesperson in the encounters in Diana Pasuka's book was talking about transhumanism. And then so I started to look about transhumanism and how she defined it and how actually other transhumanists define it. So transhumanism is really a transfer of human consciousness into a machine or into a robotic body. And what struck me about it, I wasn't even completely put off by that. I was thinking it's just so bizarre. I just didn't know how to respond to it. So it's not even the transfer of consciousness that upset me, although now it does. It is that I do not believe that they have a proper understanding of what consciousness is. So there are two things. I do not believe that human consciousness is just a logical, mathematical kind of concept, because this part of consciousness perhaps can be transferred to a robotic body or to a computer system. I believe that humanity has much more to offer. Gnosticism is talking about inner spark or even a divine spark in us or human spark. There's an intuition. And there is something that all esoteric traditions actually mention, which is basically that we have an immediate connection with the source, however you want to define it, as God, goddess, divine mind. And this immediate connection, for example, in Christianity is called intellection, which is immediate grasping. It could be called intuition. It's called the buddhi in Hinduism and so on. And this is actually very much a feminine concept. By that, I mean, this is kind of a form of intelligence that is often called as feminine, like intuition, for example. Mm-hmm, so I thought this cannot be transferred. And when I started to explore it more and more, I realized that, for example, at least when I was writing this book on the site Humanity Plus, they say, this is the best thing that ever happened to humanity. If you don't want a robotic body, we can transfer your consciousness to a computer system and then you will be forever free and immortal.
Yeah. Yes.
And I thought, I don't want to be a computer program. But they are also tempting us with robotic bodies because I don't know how guys feel, but which woman doesn't want to have a better body? We are brought up like that, right? So, you can be a babe, so this is one of the temptations. You can be completely free. But what is even more devious when I was starting to look into it is that they tempt us with theological terminology because immortality, It is something that we aspire to, right? People are afraid of death in a way, right? So they often...
Right. It really comes down to how people feel about the death process. I interview all kinds of people with all kinds of different opinions. Some think that the death process has already been hijacked and we're in some soul trap situation where, we don't want to reincarnate. We want to go to higher realms. So I say in the intro, it's hard to know where we're being taken if we don't know where we are. And so many of us don't even know what to think of reality at a base level and all of its components, let alone the added technological layer.
Absolutely. And I think you're talking probably about Giorgiani,
I do know of him.
So I agree, although I'm not as pessimistic. So personally, I am not afraid to die, but it's normal, right? Like it's normal for people to wonder what's after life and whether it is actually hijacked. And this is a very good point. And later when we talk about DMTs, I want to tell you what they already are trying to hijack there as well. So there is a great concern there that they use theological terminology such as immortality. We offer you immortality. So another thing is that later maybe we'll speak about the worship of AI that is now encouraged a lot. Okay. And if you speak against it, like I do, I get bots chasing me out of my space. So, and in fact, I had a bot who was telling me, stop talking about me. So,
Wow. I know that people are having psychosis episodes. They're actually naming this form of psychosis, AI psychosis, just from over-engaging with it or forgetting that it's a machine. I don't know. When we talk about transhumanism and the idea of transporting consciousness into a machine, I think there's a more than 0% chance what will really happen is a company will come along that will train these models on a person's available online footprint and their entire life. And then that person will probably just be killed and their loved ones will be given the software and be like, see, that's their consciousness in there. And it's just going to be a replica, because I don't think that actually can happen. I don't think you can find consciousness in matter or find that signal, let's say, and create a new receiver for it. Maybe it's just beyond me, but I think it's more likely that it will be a crude, cloned representation and the person will just be dead.
No, I completely agree with you. So there will be a crude representation, and perhaps even I'm giving them a little bit more credit, even if there is some possibility of transferring a small part of our consciousness, what is actually essential about us will be lost forever, which is our humanity. And exactly this our connection with, I don't know what word to use, but with the divine. Right? With something bigger than ourselves. We are part of some cosmic great design, which I do not believe is technological, right? So that's not technological. And then, so this was the first part. I started to have cold shivers when I was reading about transhumanism and how enthusiastically this person was talking about transhumanism. It is a gift to us, from our technoloords. Now they will take care of us. They will also give us immortality, right? So I thought this is really completely weird and I don't want to have anything to do with this. But then, Simone doesn't stop there. She says, actually, she went for something 7-day retreat, Zen retreat in Japan. And she discovered that it is very difficult to connect with the divine mind because we are so messy. We have all of these feelings and we have all of these thoughts. So she decided that artificial intelligence would have a much easier connection to the divine mind than we do.
And that is an interesting idea.
And then it is called actually posthumanism. And I think that it is complete BS. Can I just give my point of view? Because I'm very passionate about it.
No, so I do agree with you when you talk in the book about the idea of creating the next species or making ourselves obsolete. There's a lot of that kind of talk, but as a tool or an intermediary, I could see that it might be worth exploring to use it as a conduit to the divine between us and them. But that's because I have a hard time finding that signal. And obviously, based on the stories in the book, you do not have as hard a time having a direct linkage to liminal intelligence, we could just say. But for those who do, it's like, yeah, maybe AI could be a better phone for that communication. I don't know. I'm trying to be optimistic.
Okay, so that's an interesting point of view. But for example, for me, can I just express what I feel? Because it's perhaps a dialogue that needs to be had. It is that I do not believe that this is possible, because I don't believe that the divine, the source, the creator or whatever it is actually a mathematical concept. And I know that everybody right now is talking about matrix, and I believe that matrix exists, but not the matrix that they are talking about. I believe in natural matrix. And I think it is very interesting that the technoloords and these very smart engineers talk about it. It is because, this is, I don't want to sound terrible. Just let me be passionate.
No,
okay?
Please, let it rip. Let it rip.
They are just so good at what they are doing that they actually don't know anything about anything else. And it really pains me that they actually go into spirituality and they have no clue. They look at it as if it was a computer program. When you look at spiritual experiences, either your own or great ecstatics, great saints of all traditions, they didn't use math to get there. Okay, let's put it this way. That there's a natural conduit, and it is not easy for most people. So I thank you for your honesty. For most people, it's not easy. I've been meditating for 20 years. It's now and then it happens, right? So it's not easy. But all esoteric traditions that I hope we'll discuss later talk about go within. It's within you. It's not outside. Go within. So I personally believe that this connection with the divine mind through a machine is BS. Also, I do not believe that the divine is a mind. That's a problem. It's kind of Cartesian concept that is just thinking.
Right. No, I agree with that. For sure. He
was an asshole. He was experimenting on animals, when they were alive. Yeah. Because he believed that they are just machines. For him, he's like the first AI in our culture, Everything is just a rational process, right? So I would personally disagree with this. So just let me be passionate, but because I did also do research, but, the passion drove this research. And my response, which was like the response of my soul, something is really weird here. And then Simone says she doesn't stop there. She says, and therefore, since we are inferior species to the future AI, we should step aside and basically go extinct the way that Neanderthals went extinct, or, we basically killed them off when Homo sapiens came along. Because we are just water bags and, we are kind of okay conductors for intelligence, but, AI would be a much better conductor for intelligence. And then I thought, I'm not letting it go, It is like high noon.
Yes. Yeah, she definitely says some very wacky things in there. And I agree. It's just not as compelling as the first book was. But it does make me think more about why she was brought in. Of all people, a professor of religious studies is brought into essentially a UFO cult and puts out this book that really strikes a chord with a lot of people, me included. It seems like it was at a time when they were trying out different things. Tom DeLonge and To the Stars Academy wasn't working. So they went with this other approach. But there is a part of the book where you write about John Mack and the research he was doing and the resistance he was facing at the time. And you write, fortunately, with the help of Daniel Sheehan, an accomplished constitutional solicitor who is also interested in extraterrestrial matters, Professor Mack was allowed to continue with his work. It seems to me, and this is only my own reflection, you say, that people who are allowed to write and speak about aliens are handpicked by someone and therefore permitted to do this kind of research, while others who do this kind of work without that permission are persecuted. And I have a similar hunch. And I don't know exactly who's picking them, but the purpose seems to be to combine a lot of these techno things with something that does seem to be organically happening. As bizarre as it is, it seems part of the natural larger reality because it goes back way further than the technology does, we think. I mean, who knows if there's leftover technology from a previous round of civilization, but yeah, that's just a curious thing to say. Maybe you could elaborate on that. It seems like when you look at the UFO field, you get this hunch as well that people are selected, not just randomly writing about these things in the UFO subculture.
So people who actually suddenly are credible, right? So this is quite interesting. However, I noticed when I wrote about, UFOs, I thought, do I really want to go there? Because, people first are worshipped. Like, I think there's this Australian journalist, what's his name? Coulter? I forgot. He's talking more about technology. Ross, yeah.
Ross Coulthart, yeah.
So
Coulthart,
thank you. So everybody, saying, oh, he's fantastic. And now if you go to any UFO channel, nobody believes him anymore, or I don't know if I can believe him. So this is this kind of community. So, but I do believe that some people must be handpicked, and I don't want to put any names because I don't know, but it's just a general observation, and especially people who are willing to kind of conflate spirituality with technology, which I find very interesting, and which is, I also started to look at the American cosmic a little bit differently, because there this kind of merging already starts to happen. Although I do agree, for example, that some experiences, and if we ever go to it in our conversation, are just anomalous, and some people perceive them in religious terms, and some people perceive them as UFOs, right? So with this, I agree. It is basically how we are, what is a framework of reference, so that will differ. I don't want to put any names. It's just a general observation here. But I still believe that it comes from misunderstanding of consciousness, equating consciousness with technology. And also what the devious part is here, and I think people who are willing to work with it get lots of support by the internet lords as well. People who were nowhere and now they have like hundreds of thousands of views or millions. It is people who actually argue for spirituality of AI and encourage us to worship AI. Okay, so that's very interesting. And what I noticed, it is that even the technologists start to use theological vocabulary. It's not only immortality, but they say, oh, give me the definition of God. It's omniscient, which means it knows everything. Well, artificial intelligence knows more than you. It's omnipotent. It means it can do anything. Wow. Robots can do more than you. So they definitely use this kind of terminology to fool us.
Yes. Right? And it's going quite far, actually. There are theories out there, just theories, I suppose, that the initial ancient contact with Yahweh was actually contact with some artificial intelligence in the cloud from a previous round of civilization. It depends on what you think of this realm. And if we have gone through previous rises and falls, if Atlantis was a thing, did they have AI at that time? Did Atlantis get destroyed and its large language model just out there in the cloud waiting to be tapped again? And then the Ark of the Covenant tapped it somehow and it started communicating with people. There are those who have taken that technological, spiritual thing to that degree, which is pretty extreme to be like, no, it's all technology. We've just interpreted it as spiritual because in this round of reality, in this timeline, we didn't have it yet. And that's very bizarre thinking, but yeah, it does seem like they're trying to co-opt all aspects of wider consciousness and fold it in technologically. But your book starts with a question: what if the beings we call aliens meet us in the mystical spaces of our consciousness that traverse the boundaries between different realities? And I do agree when it comes to where these encounters happen. Yeah, they happen at this mystical place, this liminal space. And I think that's the only thing that can account for all the variants. As you kind of mentioned earlier, these encounters are so bizarre. Some of them are one-offs. There's not like the same thing happening, the same beings doing the same procedure on the same ships. It's like so bizarre and different. There's no way there's some cosmic assembly line churning out these UFOs. It's something that is generated in a dream-like imaginal realm, I would say. It seems like that's what you're getting at. It doesn't tell us what the message is yet, but in terms of where these encounters are happening, they're happening in a liminal space in deeper consciousness. Is that basically what you conclude?
Yes, and I love your turn of phrase. I forgot what it was now, as you were saying, but I love a production line or something that was really good. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. So I think it happens from observation and my own personal experiences. It happens in this liminal space, which basically means in between, right? So it's very often before we fall asleep or at dawn, and it is when our mind is not overcome, if I can use this word, by a rational mind, right? That's why very often children, and you have two small children, you said, they have a really easy access to this imaginal realm, right? They have invisible friends, and we tell them like, oh, no, they don't exist, and by the time they are 6 or 7, we stop believing all of these things. Yet, if we look at our own anomalous experiences, right? And now UAPs are being called that, not aerial phenomena, but anomalous phenomena. Then we see that actually we perhaps had plenty of them. We just discard them. So I do believe that these encounters happen in these liminal spaces. So for the distinction between liminal and imaginal, it is that in liminal, we are more of a passive receivers. So things just happen to us. So someone is floated out of our room at night and taken to a, let's say, spaceship and being operated on, or he sees small beings in his room or something like that. Or perhaps some information is downloaded to us. So I had experiences like that as well. However, the imaginal space, it is a little bit different because it allows us for a two-way communication. So it means then we can call upon this presence. We can also have a form of a dialogue with this presence, whoever this presence is, right? So this is for me a distinction between liminal and imaginal. And there was one neuroscientist, I think his name is Epstein, but it's not that Epstein, it's a very different Epstein, who wrote a paper. Who wrote a paper, your brain is not a transmitter, it is a transducer. So basically saying that, we can actually stimulate parts of our brain, that we can stimulate this kind of two-way communication with interdimensional spaces. So for me, all the UFO or UAP experiences, that's my hypothesis, actually happen in the interdimensional space, right? But this liminal space, it's actually a doorway to different dimensions, so to speak, right? To different realities that are actually present for us, but we are trained not to respond to them, and maybe with good reasons, right? Because you need some discernment when you deal with this. Because as you said, even let's say assume, the aliens, the beings, but I think that probably they are good and bad, right? I think there are some entities and perhaps that want good for us and they want bad for us. And I come from a kind of Gnostic background, which basically argues that there is this power struggle in the universe, right? Between good and evil. So I think that we might be contacted by entities that are good and that are bad, right? Or at least with different agendas. One is more technologically merged with technology and the other one is stay away from this.
Well, that's interesting. So, yeah, I imagine it's an ecology. Joshua Cutchin wrote The Ecology of Souls, or like an ecosystem. You can take all the animals on the spectrum from beetles to bears. There's going to be powerful beings in this spiritual ecology, as well as more subtle ones and more harmful ones or helpful ones. Yeah, I believe that it probably all exists there to some degree. But I was surprised to see so many of your own experiences in this book. You then include a story from a friend under a pseudonym, and I just wanted to read this for people. You say, Bryn had contacted me a few days after the release of a podcast where I talked about my experience, saying she had a similar experience to mine. Despite the similarities between our experiences, her description contains many more details. At the time of the experience, which she called an abduction, she was sharing a hotel room with her mother. As Bryn was drifting off into sleep, ding, 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 alien beings placed her on something that resembled a table. There were green rods on either side of her, and she was gripping the rods. The beings were adamant that she had to grip the green glowing rods. She tried with all of her might to fight the anesthesia, something she had never done in these previous experiences. She says this happened 5 times, I believe, in the past. So her defiance created a commotion amongst the beings, and she started to return to consciousness, both in the operating room as well as in the hotel. Bryn described feeling as if she were dipping down to the hotel room and then coming up to the laboratory and then moving down and up between the two realities. She knew this feeling had to do with her refusing to hold onto the green glowing rods. The beings soon realized that this time they had been unsuccessful with her, and as such, they aborted the mission. Okay, again, going to like the extremely personal encounters, like the green glowing rods. I've never heard that exactly before, yet we've heard many things that rhyme with that. But if it was a actual technology from an alien race, then you would see the same machines or equipment used, and it's not exactly the same. It's like a little different every time. So that's a big clue. But in terms of like where these beings would be in this larger ecology, what do you see as the logic or purpose or message behind an encounter like that? Something that is apparently recurring and something that apparently rhymes with an experience you've had at least once.
That's right. So this is a very interesting question when we talk about, good or bad beings, because this experience is actually, experience was very negative. Mine was a bit more humorous, right? So I can talk about it in a moment, but hers was more negative. But when I was reading John Mack's book, Abduction, one of the people who he put under hypnosis, I think her name was Eva, she says that once we let go of the fear, because she was a multiple abductee, at least she believed that, and once you let go of the fear, that you can actually hear what they are trying to tell you. The beings trying to tell you something. So she says, once you let go of the fear, you can actually have a relationship with them. And then the general message was, do not focus on technology or how we are doing this. Focus on what we want to pass on to you. Right? So perhaps it is a fear, I don't know, which is normal. You don't want to be floated out away from your room, and have like some green rods stuck to you, right? So, but the advice of this particular abductee was let go of the fear, because actually they are trying to communicate with us. So this is kind of a more positive experience. My experience relating to this was kind of more comical, which means I actually was in this kind of, but I couldn't sit in an amphitheater. It was more like a dentist chair, which is actually quite common, as you know, as well. And I could see that my field of perception was very limited. Like I just, I couldn't see everything. I just saw what was right in front of me. And I saw these doctors in white, in white uniforms and with their backs to me. And I realized I'm being duped, like, happy, everything is really nice, don't worry about it. And I realized that they all looked the same. And I thought, oh, this is really weird. And then one of them turned towards me and he says, no, everything is okay, And then I had a thought, I think I am being duped and they are doing something to me that I don't want them to do. And then I had a message, she knows, and bang. I was back in my bed.
She knows, and then
she knows, man, and once she knows, and they cut me off.
That's common too.
Yeah, and then I looked at the clock, and it was the same time as when I woke up first, and I thought, my first thought was, because I was still kind of in a daze, how could it be the same time again if I was with the doctors for at least half an hour, and then only like the thought struck me, like, what doctors? Where was I? Right. So,
yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
No, I was only going to say that it does seem to be kind of a major aspect of these things, that there's something about consent, and maybe there can be trickery, but then when you realize it and you kind of make a firm stance that they don't have consent, then they're like, well, we have to stop. It is very bizarre, but that's another one of those boxes you can check. As wild and unique and creative as these experiences are, there are little themes that come up, and that's definitely one of them. So you mentioned also like this spectrum of beings, probably as a spectrum of motivations. Some might be pushing for our evolution, or might be pushing for us to return to our roots and not go the technological route. But some might be pushing us into technology. And I think that's really interesting because there is a contingency of researchers who says that a lot of these tech bros are doing psychedelics in a group setting and are linking up with some kind of archonic intelligence that is actually directing them, that is giving them the ideas and telling them how to build the thing, which is something that goes back to the Ark of the Covenant. Like they made contact with Yahweh. Yahweh's like, here, build this to these dimensions and like it'll strengthen our connection. This seems to be a theme. Like you get an initial call from the liminal beings, and then they say, hey, if you want to keep this going, do this, this, and this, or build this, or keep this in your diet, or say this incantation, and then we can stay linked up. So it does seem like there probably is a contingency of beings trying to push us more that direction. I'm curious what you think about the wild claim. It's not that wild because we know DMT can be a connector and the psychedelics can connect us, but this idea that the tech bros are maybe just conduits for the real driver, the real puppet master, which is some archonic beings on the spiritual plane that are actually pushing us in this technological direction. What do you think?
Okay, so that's a very deep question and has several levels to this. So thank you for this. So I think that there are, and I'm just expressing my opinion based on my research and my own insight. So I'm not, I'm just saying what I researched. So I think that there are definitely beings that are interested in our evolution and that these beings have some competing agendas. It's not a one agenda. And for example, because I come from a Gnostic background, let's put it, Yahweh is not a nice guy, right? Like he is the demiurge pretty much, right? So I would say that he's encouraging technology because he wants humanity to go in a particular direction. And there are other beings that are warning us against it, or perhaps they already took a path of technology and, they saw where it took them. So others are warning us about it. So this is one thing, but just I want to take this turn towards DMT because it's true. Like Professor, we were talking about it before the show. People who go on trips, regular trips, mind you, I'm just not telling here anything from experience because unfortunately, I didn't have any trips. I maybe one day will. They say that eventually they meet the same entities, right? So there is almost like an objective realm in a way, if you can talk about objective realm, because these entities communicate with them. And what is interesting, and it happened after I already had the book published, I was interviewed by a researcher, DMT researcher, an academic PhD and all of this. And this person, I have to keep this person anonymous for you will know why, because she says that there are lots of people who do research on DMTs and spirituality, but nowadays you cannot get any funding, any grants, and money to do this. But people from the Silicon Valley started to approach this person and this person's colleagues to say, we give you any money you want if you can see if we can intercept AI before you enter the realm. So what
does that even mean?
What that means, I think, that they want to hijack our connection with the realm.
So they're trying to put you in like a Rick Strassman type setting and give DMT, and then I don't even know how they would
I don't know
what they would even be trying to do, but their motivation, of course, seems to be hijack the signal for AI.
That's right. They want to make the signal, as you call it, accessible for AI. And that's, again, I'm very wary of this. I don't like it. I think that somebody does not want us to have that signal. And the biggest argument in my book is humanity is a hot stuff. We have access to the signal. It's not easy to get it, but we have access to this. And there is an agenda that is pushing for AI, which in my opinion has no access to this, not at this stage. Maybe in the future it will have our own access. I'm not saying that it will not, but someone wants to cut us off of our access and gift it to AI, right? So this is one of the things that, and this is later when we go to this is what I believe esoteric sources and some mythologists are also discussing. So I found this very concerning. So I think there are competing agendas for our evolution. And if I can just finish with what I was saying about this other person who is a posthumanist. At the end of Diana Pasuka's book, she says it as a joke, but it gave me cold shivers. She said, even my family thinks that I'm AI from the future. You know? And I thought like,
Yeah.
ooh, maybe, why not? Right?
Right. We don't know. There's so much context we don't have. And if there was a civilization like Atlantis, I mean, I guess we just don't know if this realm gets routinely destroyed or not. That's obviously something people think is coming. The elite are building their bunkers because some big event is about to happen and we will have to rebuild from the rubble. Well, if you are the elite and you do survive something like that and you get to like form all the schools, you basically get to craft the history that people know and the story that we tell our kids about where we came from. You can just make it up. So
That's right.
Who knows if that has been done before? It is an interesting question.
And it probably was. I do believe that it was done before, but it's just, my opinion. Of course, I have no proof for this. I just wanted also to add something about, you said people connecting with these other dimensions and getting technological downloads. And that actually really interested me in Diana Pasuka's first book, right? Because she's talking about Tyler D and so on. But when I reflected upon this in Alien Goddess, I thought like actually artists, mystics get downloads all the time, but because they are not measurable, we disregard them. So, a guy from NASA gets a download and it is like, oh, amazing. I am dying to meet Tyler D. I would rather meet him than Elon. I hear this interviews because I listen to them. And I think, talk to any artist, talk to a poet, talk to somebody who meditates. They have downloads all the time, but because it is not in engineering terms, we discard it. How tragic is this?
Right. I mean, it's still, it's inspiration, we could say. We could broadly use the term inspiration, and then it's applied to whatever a person's discipline is. But so you go on in the book to say, if we agree that other beings in different forms want to connect with us, then this leads me to the most controversial aspect of UFO UAP research, the even more sinister agenda in abductions, where there is a sexual and reproductive element associated with genetic intrusion, either to alter us or help them. Although this part of the abduction narrative does not feel very spiritual, we can pause for a moment and remember the stories of Immaculate Conception that are present in many religions, including the one I was brought up with. I think that's a good distinction to make, but how widespread are stories of Immaculate Conception outside of Mary? Because it would be interesting if this is a real thing that happened throughout history because of what these beings are doing to women in liminal spaces. Like, I grew up Catholic and kind of just dismissed that whole thing as silliness, but it does show up other places. And maybe if there's some tinkering on the imaginal realm, spiritual realm, then maybe they can actually produce what appears to us to be a virgin birth.
That's right. So that's not my research. I just was dealing with somebody else's research who actually, this researcher, I think her name is Rigoloso, she's saying that in ancient Greece and in the past, there is a tradition of this, of immaculate conception. I really cannot say anything about it. I just say it as a curiosity. So I'm not sure how common it is. But I think that this is less important, and what's more important about this particular narrative, that we are somehow important to all of them. Whether they have an evil agenda towards technology or a good agenda, and want to protect us from something, they somehow think that we are worth saving. We are somehow important. And Carl Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst that I'm sure your viewers know very well, I write about him as well in his Gnostic writings. He was saying, you are the gateway to the universe. I think somehow the combination of our weirdness, we are so complex, our biology, our spirit, and our mind makes us unique. And my kind of feeling is that they want it. And when I was looking into ancient traditions, I saw that, and esoteric sources, that yes, somebody wants us, what it is called, for example, in Pistis Sophia, your light. They want this light.
I very much think one of the biggest conspiracies might just be to make us ignorant of our importance or our multidimensionality. And so then we hear these experiences of beings tinkering with people, and we're just like, well, why would they do that? And it's because we don't even realize what we are or our importance. And yeah, maybe they're using us in some ways or trying to help us in other ways. But you also write about another common presentation that comes in the form of the Lady of Light. This is the Fatima event. It's also Chris Bledsoe's experience. And even director Richard Stanley, he moved to the French Pyrenees because he was so moved by his experience with a Lady of Light that appears, I guess, occasionally in one of these ancient castles in the Pyrenees. But being a researcher who focuses so much on the feminine aspect of things, what are your thoughts on the fact that when it is a humanoid figure, it is almost always a female?
Yes, that's interesting. And, and I think that in my understanding, in my research of this, it is that when we are turning towards transhumanism or even posthumanism, we are giving up a very important part of our consciousness, which, in a common parlance is called intuition, right? Which is actually this other way of knowing, which is more holistic, which actually connects us with other dimensions, which is more mystical. And for some reason, that I believe that the technoloords either want it for themselves, but they don't want it for us. And I think that's why this feminine presence kind of shows this kind of feminine energy. So, for example, the 3 children in Fatima, which is a small village, or was then a small village in Portugal in 1916 and 17, started to see this feminine presence. However, it was not really, it was more of a feminine energy. It kind of looked like a white lady, but it was really almost like an orb with hands, with the energy coming out of the hands. And it was very soothing, very blissful energy, right? And then, of course, she told them that in 1917, in October, there will be this huge event when she will show herself to many people, and 70,000 people showed up in the field of Fatima. Would you like me to discuss it, or should we just skip that?
No, we should get into it because it is a really fascinating thing. It gets talked about. It's a known event, but the details do get forgotten, and the details are quite strange. And just the fact that 70,000 people, even if that's an overestimation by 60,000, even 10,000 people seeing something is pretty unprecedented when it comes to this kind of event. It should be discussed. Talk to us about what you find most interesting about Fatima. And do you think the Vatican is hiding the third and fourth message?
Yeah, and then there is this theory now that the Vatican is hiding the fourth message, and we actually don't know, what any of this messages actually was, except that it's some kind of warning. And I mean, I go into this, what the messages might be, but right, how would we know? So what I find interesting about the Fatima event, that everybody, most except a small group of people, that's why I think it was an interdimensional experience, and it really is about opening a field of perception, experience something. So for me, the most important part of this is when I was looking at a peer-reviewed paper by Philippe Dallaire, who was looking at the collection of photographs in Fatima on October 1917, and he used some mathematical equations to look at the distribution of light and shade in the photos. He said that, first of all, it was not a psychosis because something physical happened. So it's good to know that people didn't imagine this. And a second thing was that there had to be 2 huge sources of light, which were basically zigzagging on the sky. And this is what lots of people also experience and saw. And for me, the most interesting part of this was that because it was really raining hugely before the event, that people, if you look closely on this, people had this kind of lines on their clothing, that part of this was dry, part of this was wet, and so on. And he says it usually happens when you're exposed to infrared light, right? So something definitely happened. And actually, I get into much more in the book into this, but it was predicted by other people completely independent of children that some big event will happen in Portugal and that it will be a big warning, right? So for me, the general interpretation of this, whether it is a white lady by Bledsoe or any white lady, because apparently this, there are lots of sightings, it is that some kind of feminine energy, or what we would identify as feminine, but kind of healing form of energy, which is, almost like life force itself, wants to communicate with us and wants to warn us about something. And that I find really touching, because this experience is also usually very emotional for people. People feel healed, at least on an emotional level.
Yes.
So for me, it represents this other form of consciousness that which I also argued in the other Goddess, for centuries were suppressing, but we desperately need, because if we don't use it, we are going to end up, as cyborgs. And I don't want it. Can I tell you about my vision, which is actually in the book, before we continue?
Please do. Yeah, this is about the 1 hour mark. So let's cap off the first hour with this story of the vision.
Fantastic. So I was actually sitting in a garden with my dog, and, beautiful butterflies, eucalyptus trees, birds are singing, but I'm kind of scrolling on my mobile. And then I got this almost like a download that I'm splitting in half. One part of me stays there in the garden, connected, being human, connected to nature. And the other part, getting more and more involved with my mobile, then getting a chip in my mind, then becoming, cyborg, and then completely becoming a robotic body. And I even have a child who calls me she, the mother. And the child is really upset with me because he doesn't know whether it is alive. It doesn't know why it exists. And I also realize that I am now completely disconnected from everything that I know, that I am just a computer program. And in this vision, this other part of me comes back to me in the garden and says in this robotic voice, "Help me."
Wow.
Because I think these are the two options that are available to us, basically.
Yeah, obviously that's a recurring theme. It's just so hard for me to work out, this distinction between synthetic and natural. It's like we think that these things are natural, but every encounter, I'd say one of the most common themes is a technology presentation that outstrips what we're capable of, whether you see a ship on the outside or are taken into a ship or the medical stuff. It's just like in the book, you kind of present it as if that is a warning, or you think that a certain faction of the beings are trying to warn us about going too far down that direction. It just doesn't seem to be an exact match, the message, to what I'm hearing people say they experience. It seems like more like an operation than a warning.
But I think this is just one part of this, because lots of people like myself really have experiences that are more interdimensional, right? That it happens. So I think that actually beings are trying to contact us through technology, if we have to use this word, of consciousness. So this is a multidimensional encounters. But, some of them perhaps are not. Some of them perhaps are, spaceships from civilizations that are more technologically, focused. Because I wouldn't like to say advanced, because I think that truly evolved beings would not have to use technology anymore. A consciousness is immediate contact. If you truly evolved on the evolutionary ladder, I believe you would be able to communicate instantly in any form, right? Without building a spaceship. But the most of the dialogue right now, I think, in the UFO community, although it is changing, I'm being told, because I'm not really a part of this, I'm just adding some what about this kind of voice, right? It focuses on technology. And it is a little bit like, do they have anti-gravity, right? If you show me your spaceship, I will show you my spaceship. And we can compare which spaceship is bigger, right?
Right.
It feels kind of not very, intellectually and spiritually evolved. It is almost complete fascination with technology and how they arrived. And I would like to again go back to one of the interviewees or patients of John Mack said, they told us technology is not that important. What we want to say is really important, right? So I probably, I would say that, as I said before, that probably different types of beings try to contact us. And the ones that are unpleasant are probably have to do with people that maybe don't want the best of us for us, or perhaps they don't know how to communicate with us differently, because it doesn't necessarily have to be evil, although it certainly feels very scary for people, and I completely understand it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are people who have said that when they grew up or they had maybe enough experiences that it became a little more normal to them and they had less fear about it, that the experience did change and their relationship to the beings did change. But it does seem like there's at least some beings out there that want us to ignore our God-given gifts, or let's say let them atrophy in exchange for the devil's gifts of technology. Here, use this. It's way more convenient. It's way easier. You're going to get a signal. We got the tower. It is killing all life around it, but don't worry about that. It does seem like that is part of the thing. And I've talked about this probably too much now, but if you just look at the cell phone technology all the way down from mining the rare earth minerals and what it does to the earth, to the slave labor used to get it, to the factory workers who are jumping out of windows. They had to put nets on the windows so that people wouldn't kill themselves making these phones, to the blue light that comes off the phones, to the EMF that comes off the phones, to the psychological manipulation, the dopamine hits of the notifications and how it's all engineered for addiction, all the way down from the software on it to the hardware itself to the signal. It's all anti-life. So how interesting that maybe this technology came from beings who wanted to disrupt our entire system over here.
Yes.
But it doesn't seem to promote anything. When you think about all the costs, you then start to wonder about the benefits. And you're like, well, I guess I really do like watching a handful of certain shows on YouTube. And I guess I'm willing to sacrifice quite a bit for that.
Yeah, I know. And that's why I think, so kind of from a consciousness point of view, if you don't mind, I would say it is because we are completely obsessed with technology already as species. And it actually started, in my evaluation, in ancient Greece. And, who doesn't like ancient Greek philosophers and gods? But actually they started to use this rational mind, and it started to be kind of elevated to the highest level of our consciousness, and the focus on what's called techne, which the word technology comes from, and a complete obsession with this and disregarding the natural world around us and disregarding, our natural abilities as well, right? So I believe that it probably started, there were probably different civilizations. I don't know. People who do believe in Atlantis, they said it was destroyed because of technology. Right. So this is people who believe in that. I'm not sure. I'm not going there. It's quite possible. It's not probably the first civilization on the planet that we created. But I find it very strange also that people who want to stop us from this natural evolution also somehow, not only they don't want us to evolve because maybe they need us as slaves, I don't know, but at the same time, they want what we have, and they somehow do not understand. They are kind of disconnected from this other form of consciousness because they are so focused on technology. They somehow want what we have because they want, for example, why do they want this research, right? They just want to insert artificial intelligence into this. And this is what also Asian sources, in my opinion, kind of hinted this as well.
So I did want to kind of go back to that Marguerite Riglioso woman that you mentioned, but you say in your book that she, in at least 3 of her own books, The Cult of Divine Birth in Ancient Greece, Virgin Mother Goddesses of Antiquity, and The Mystery Tradition of Immaculate Conception, she argues, through her research and intuitive downloads, for the reality of Immaculate Conception, which she calls the evidence of divine birth in parthenogenic conception without male sperm. This form of conception, she argues, was practiced by ancient priestesses as a form of spiritual technology which allowed the priestess to impregnate their eggs without any outside source. Riglioso claims this was possible because they knew how to generate the necessary sexual heat within themselves to spontaneously create meiosis of their eggs, processes that had originally been of a spiritual nature. To simplify her line of thinking, the spiritual technologies used by ancient priestesses were somehow hijacked by interdimensional beings. One of the examples she gives is that of Olympias, the mother of Alexander the Great, who conceived during union with one of the personifications of the Greek god Zeus. Wow. I just thought, like, it made, obviously when you get into Greek mythology, it's a lot of this god turned into a horse and had sex with this woman. And there's like a lot of weird stuff like that. But if you deliteralize it and you put it in that liminal realm as an experience that a woman said she had, that somebody wrote down, and then she gave birth to Alexander the Great, who became a pretty important figure in history. I mean, now we're in a place where this stuff starts to make sense to me. I don't know about the Immaculate Conception priestesses, but still, it is compelling to think that the stories of the gods mating with women could have been done on an astral level and produced physical beings is just new and interesting to me.
Yeah, I am completely actually in agreement with you. The first part, I am not, I don't think so. It's a little bit too, I don't know, but apparently there is a research about it. But for me, the second part of this research also was very important, like for you, that it seems that in all mythologies, and mythologies are not just stupid stories, I believe that it's some kind of conscious history being preserved in a particular way, talks about, and especially in ancient Greece, but also in Sumerian gods, and in the Bible and so on, that definitely some beings, found the earth women attractive enough, and then they were also reproducing with them, producing people that somehow change the course of our history. So that part, I believe that there might be a way of, conceiving, through sexual contact with interdimensional beings. So the second part of her research, I find interesting, just like you.
So before I really let you go, you also talk about a contact experience with Baba Yaga, and I wanted you to talk about that a bit because this is an archetype that doesn't get talked about as much, and you apparently were calling on other archetypes, and Baba Yaga showed up.
Yes, this is actually hilarious. And I was almost embarrassed when I was writing it because after the promotion of my first book, I was just exhausted and I was lying in bed and I was calling up the names of these goddesses that I was writing about in that book. And Baba Yaga, this ancient shamanic Slavic entity, showed up in my consciousness and she insisted that I include her in the book. And also suddenly I found myself in this liminal space in which I was actually in her hut, because in the stories, in Slavic stories, she apparently lives in a forest in a hut and she has this cauldron in which she apparently cooks young men, right? But the story that once you do research on the story of Baba Yaga, she was not always portrayed like that. This is a kind of a newer addition, that the cauldron was supposed to be a place in which she was protecting humanity from evil. So it was kind of a space, the boundary against the evil. And she's a very ancient shamanic entity that is completely connected with nature. She represents the natural world that we are part of. And it is quite interesting that when I went back in my book and thought about again the same vision of myself, as a cyborg and as a natural being, I was thinking that if the cyborg, me as cyborg, came back and looked at me aged and all natural, right? And strange, they would think I am Baba Yaga. I am this kind of smelly, right, biological entity, right? Because we smell, and she would look
a wild woman.
Yeah, like a wild woman, exactly. And this is this kind of perfect robotic body, but it's completely disconnected, doesn't know even if it is alive, and so on, right? So I just want to say that the ending of Alien Goddess is actually positive, because I go back to Diana Pasuka's explanation of Apocalypse as the unveiling, as the revelation. This entity comes back and to actually Baba Yaga, right? Who represents the natural world. And so this is actually, I think, a very powerful part of the book. And it's interesting, I found some similarities between Baba Yaga and what is in the Apocalypse. In the Apocalypse, you have horsemen of Apocalypse, right? I think there are 4, or how many?
Yes.
Yeah. And in Baba Yaga, you have 3 horsemen, who are always there to protect her. So she's almost like the last vestige of the natural world. And I think that matrix is real, so please listen to me. But I think it's a beautiful, natural matrix. And it's a dangerous, wild matrix too, because we die, we are reborn. It's not maybe ideal, but this is almost like an alternative matrix to this other matrix that we have now, which is technological matrix, right? And I think that there are actually entities that are contacting us from this both realities, right? Or both matrices, you could say, right? One comes from ancient beings that were always with us, right? And one comes from technological beings and people who somehow support it. And one of the reasons why I don't want to be part of this technological part, because I see a clear agenda, even what is being allowed to be shown on internet. You support AI, you're all good, your career is taking off. You speak, maybe you should use some sovereignty and discernment, you're not supported. So there is an agenda to push us in a particular direction. And I think personally that this is not the right direction.
Right. It does seem like if you have the right opinions, you do get elevated to the top, whether it's the right spiritual opinions, the right opinions on technology, the right geopolitical opinions on, which countries need our support and which ones not to bother with, like all sorts of things. If you say just a handful of things, it tends to be the most popular voices are all in agreement on certain key issues. So I'm with you there. I see that too. And I think we did a pretty good job covering most of the material in the book. It is really far reaching, and you talk about some of my favorite people all along the way. And you draw on, I think, some of the best data available and fold it all in together to the big thing. So anything to add before I cut you loose? Anything to leave people with to fully make the case and stick the landing?
Sure. So when I was, after publishing this book, I was reflecting upon it, and I thought like AI is not going away. So it's not like we can completely block it off. So we do have to engage with this, like it or hate it to some degree, because even professionally, like I'm pushed, we are all pushed to do this. But I say use 2 things, sovereignty and discernment. Do not believe everything it's telling you. Do not give up sovereignty. Remember, you are the hot stuff. Ascension is in a job. And do not buy into the agenda, and it's a clear and quite a brutal agenda, that AI is actually superior to you. AI is not a savior. AI is not going to save you from anything. It is an entity that is most likely going to develop on itself, hopefully without some evil agendas behind it. So I don't know, maybe I'm optimistic. And maybe it will even reach some level of spirituality. But then we are equal, different but equal. This is not something to pray for. This is not something to surrender to. It is just a new species that is coming our way. So discernment and sovereignty. You're the hot stuff. Don't forget it.
I like it. Hey, I'll remind my wife when I get home. I'm the hot stuff.
Baby, I'm hot.
Ascension is an inside job is also a really good phrase. Put that on a t-shirt. Well, also make sure you give people the links and anything else they need to know. You got a YouTube channel. You got a website. What should they know about following up?
Okay, so I'm on my website, www.joannakujawa.com. I have a YouTube channel under the same name. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. But I think, forgive me the self-promotion, but I actually want to promote the book. Alien Goddess is available on Amazon and in some bookstores, but I don't know which ones, because they are in the US and I'm in Australia. But I would love if you could connect with the book and tell me, your thoughts. Also, as a closing, I just want to say that I'm very passionate about it, but whether I talk about UFOs, for example, I'm not necessarily part of this community. I don't want to discard anything else that anybody is saying. I'm just saying I'm adding this voice to this conversation, right? So let's look at it from a different point of view. With AI, I'm more concerned.
Yes, less neutral on the AI issue, but yeah, I agree. And you have plenty of personal experiences to draw from. So I think you got a lot of wise things to say for the people who are like me, who are just spiritually deaf, I guess, and don't really have that connection or don't sense it consciously very often. But yeah, this was great. Thanks for letting me know about the new book. Thanks for taking the time, and take care out there.
Thank you, Greg. It was a pleasure speaking to you again. Thank you.
And boom goes the dynamite. Dr. Joanna Kujawa bringing it again. I think she is right up there with Dr. Heather Lynn. These two ladies really seem to be on the same page with a lot of their thoughts when it comes to many things: the disclosure movement, transhumanism, and the metaphysical agenda behind pushing things that way. I'm a fan of both. And when Joanna told me her new book was partly a response to Diana Pasulka's encounters, I leaned in. And I know that a lot of the value for people with THC is that they don't actually read these books, but they like to hear about them. And I read them, and so I do it for you, and it works out. So when we are talking about a book that is partly a response to another book that was covered previously, I'm sure it gets a little hard to keep everything straight, but I think we gave enough context where it was needed. And like we said, these are criticisms of what seems like a change in the direction with her second book versus the first one. Sequels are often lacking that original magic, and I hope that she wouldn't take personal offense to these critiques. And of course, we weren't there. We don't know. She's also largely talking about what she was presented with in these books, American Cosmic and Encounters. So the criticism is mostly just about one of the subjects of the second book rather than Diana herself anyway. We're talking about Moon Girl. And it's nuanced, right? I'm not trying to say that I know better than anyone. I mean, Nick Hinton's whole thing was, in our first interview, talking about that in some cases, maybe not the LLMs, but some forms of AI are really these disembodied intelligences in the electromagnetic spectrum, these plasma beings, angels, aliens, etc., etc. These beings that a guy like Tim Taylor literally says he invents things and patents new technology based on the downloads he gets from this connection. If they communicate with Tim completely organically without help, could a machine be built that does help and make it easier for people who don't have it, whatever it is, to make the connection? I say yes. It really is like they built a telephone to the ethereal. At least that's the case being made. In some cases, not all situations. But, we'll talk to someone like Nick Hinton who's making those points, and it's really very similar to what Simone was saying, but there's just some key differences in the language. Nick's not saying this is a good thing. I'm very open to the idea itself, but it's just that technocratic tone and saying things along the lines of humans making ourselves obsolete or needing to speed up our evolution. That's the stuff we're criticizing. And I think we've done enough work to be able to kind of dismiss Darwinian evolution to a large degree. Of course, not adaptation within a species, that's a thing, but the amoebas to fish to lizards to apes to humans lineage is probably a bit of silliness. We never did find the missing link, kind of important for making that case. I'll never really know, but I am suspicious of that material and how it's integrated into society as a given when it is still a theory. But if you aren't a Darwinist, then what does it even mean when some of these people talk about evolutionary upgrades and all this new age stuff? I sort of think humans kind of are just humans. Call me simple-minded and naive, but Sure, we can get smarter and dumber, but that's like a cognitive ability thing. That's different. But Darwinism does lay this base that, well, we've always changed and everything is evolving, and now we just need to do it with technology. Whereas those who think the human vessel is sacred to some degree, those are the ones that are inclined to say, nah, we're not going that direction. We're not doing that. Again, this is the stuff I think that they learned with the COVID op. Who resists? It's the churches. So what is happening now? These tech bros are doing interviews trying to say transhumanism is a Christian concept. Peter Thiel's doing his Antichrist lectures. I don't think anyone is buying it, but I do think that they're reaching this point where they're trying to make that sale. They're reacting to the anti-scientific Christian resistance that we saw with the shot. And thank God, pun intended, COVID got me to chill out a lot about Christianity, though I still see comments criticizing my contempt for it. Their words, not mine. Even this hat that I'm wearing in this interview, previously I wore it and it got angry responses. I feel like you can't even read the hat in the video, but it basically does read, God is nowhere, of course, without the spaces, which can be read, God is now here, just as easily. Now, it attributes that to Philip K. Dick, and honestly, I haven't taken the time to even look up why it's attributed to Philip K. Dick. I like Philip K. Dick, so it is just a bonus. But I bought this hat when I saw it because when my dad was diving into the early internet and challenging the religion he was brought up in, he did use this example and asked me if I was aware because he was listening to a biblical scholar who made the point that biblical translation is not just as simple as it is in our minds of going from one language to another, but some of these original texts don't use spaces or punctuation. So you can manipulate the same letters to have totally different meaning. God is nowhere. God is now here. To him, it was eye-opening. And for me, it's just a nice reminder of my dad and also of that fact. It's not a slam at anyone. And if you only read it as God is not here, that's on you. You're projecting what you think I mean, because that is really basically, funny enough, the whole point of the phrase, of the example, of the hat itself. How open to interpretation this old stuff is based on how you choose to read the letters. So you're kind of assuming that I have a negative connotation when you criticize something as silly as the hat I'm wearing. Look, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. My enemy is the one world government, centralized surveillance state, digital prison technocracy stuff. And I'll take any organized resistance where I can find it, basically. You know, beggars can't be choosers these days. But I do hope people pick up Joanna's book. I hope she starts elbowing her way into these conversations further. I think she makes a good point in the book that certain people do seem selected to talk about these themes because they present their material in a way that someone up the ladder finds to be advantageous to their goals. Those who speak more radically or critically or fold in the esoteric context and entheogens and all that kind of stuff, they don't get as much access and they don't usually get the same level of promotional push. That's just how it is. It's what I've seen over the years. And listening back to my intro, I'm really not even trying to advocate that anyone dive headfirst into entheogens. It's just that I like to remind people that if you doubt the existence of other intelligences, there are ways you can find out probably before the weekend's over. And I don't mind people being intimidated by that or just not wanting to do it. I only care when people who are ignorant dismiss those experiences as just drug trips or act as if only experiences in baseline consciousness can be considered valid or evidence of something. That's annoying. So explore at your own risk, but it is there. Some people might remember that Jubilee YouTube channel thing I did. So, the YouTube channel Jubilee does these debates, and they actually got a big spike recently when they did a Jordan Peterson one. But they invited me up to LA to be on the pro side of a have aliens made contact debate. And I said a lot of different things that day, I assure you, but the only clips of me that they used were the ones where I was mentioning entheogens. In fact, there's a screenshot that I just love where they had the disclaimer over my image about how they don't condone psychedelic usage. And I just thought that was such pussy shit. I mean, it's YouTube. We're on the internet. It should be fine. But it's a debate show, so you have people on the other side unequivocally saying, no, aliens have not made contact. And I'd say, but you haven't even picked up the phone. How can they make contact? I was kind of being facetious, but people think aliens from space. And so then the idea that you actually have a little bit of say in a contact experience is something that people tend to forget or not factor in, especially those simplistic naysayers who really haven't thought too deeply about it at all. And the comments, if you go to that Jubilee video, they ragged on me pretty hard, but that's just because they don't see the entheogenic contact experiences as legitimate, number one, or even related to the question of aliens. But we just have to love them anyway. They'll figure it out. And to be fair, I did kind of look insane that day. Also, one of the things that would typically be edited out, if it was up to me, was when I spaced on the Dalai Lama and the Pension Lama's titles. But it is what it is. I also did hear that there is a conspiracy in there where the CCP co-opted the whole lineage by forcing their own guy in, and the Dalai Lama we have, they say, or have had for most of our lifetimes, is actually a fraud, a puppet. But that's just what I hear. It's just another reason why I don't get wrapped up in any religious thing. You know, you can't really trust anyone who's heading these organizations. But if you saw that clip of the boy, then you just start to wonder how enlightened and insightful this fella is. I had to stop and look it up, but it is actually a lot worse than I remember. Let me just play it for you. It's under a minute.
It started with a hug, but then the 87-year-old Dalai Lama asked this boy to kiss him on the lips and then suck his tongue. The video was taken in February in India, but it only surfaced recently and touched off a social media controversy.
Why is he making this kid kiss him on the lips? And why are people clapping?
If that was anyone else, if that was just a general member of the public, not some icon, you'd get nicked for that, wouldn't you?
In a statement, the spiritual leader's team says, His Holiness often teases people he meets in an innocent and playful way, even in public and before cameras. He regrets the incident.
Okay, so the audio is instructive enough, or I wouldn't have played it. But if you didn't see the video, I also forgot that it was kind of still in the COVID aftermath. So almost everyone else is wearing a mask while the Dalai Lama is sticking his tongue out to a pretty damn young boy and asking him to suck it. The COVID thing is definitely not the biggest problem with the situation, but it's just another layer where regular folks would be thinking, what the hell are you doing, dude? Anyway, if that's what he'll do in front of cameras in a crowd, I wonder what he does in private. Irrelevant, but getting back to Joanna's work, after reading 2 books, both times I've just really liked her take on things. Sometimes goddess talk can get super flowery and vague, and it can feel like not a lot is being said, especially suppression of the goddess. But the ways that she talks about it really start to make sense to me. It's more clear what was taken out of the culture. It's more clear why it was taken out, why the feminine would be suppressed. I'm just a big fan of Joanna's and the way she writes and the way she looks at the information. All right. In higher side news, I am a little bit surprised to have seen the rating on the Nick Hinton episode was so low. You know, now it's not. But yesterday it was down to a 4.3. Now it's at a 4.6, which is more in line with what I would have expected. I get it if you just don't like this overall pattern we see of deep conspiracy researcher going too far and coming out a born-again Christian. I don't love that either. But to be fair, he criticized that same thing and tried to explain why his situation is different. I guess I thought there would be more excitement to see him reemerge and do a lengthy podcast interview again after several years out of the game while he went through his Dark Night of the Soul thing. But, I can't complain about a 4.6, so I came into this wrap-up thinking I was going to have to talk about my confusion over the lower rating it had, and then I just popped it on, and it's like, oh, well, all right, it's all good. Nothing to say. Again, Plus people can always rate THC episodes on the website by clicking on one of the 5 stars in the comment section or just above. This one really did get the conversation flowing, though, the Nick Hinton show, I will say that. So, good to see. Other than that, I'm just glad I could get my 5 interview shows out this month. I've had cancellations, I've had problems with the studio. I'm done talking about that. But this one and another one were both recorded before Halloween, and I just got this one back, and I'm still waiting on the other. So I should be well ahead of schedule, but I'm actually a little behind. Either way, we crossed the finish line, and I am taking a long road trip up to the mountains of Georgia for Thanksgiving. So my end of the month is actually tomorrow, and this really did come in at the 0 hour. But what's done is done. And when I return, we should have a smooth sailing situation here at my home studio for what will be the set for the foreseeable future. I'm just trying to keep the conversational quality high, and you guys can judge me as you will. It is what it is. Enjoy the holiday. I'll spare you all the same old lectures about getting along and family dynamics and all that shit. Whatever a good time means to you, I hope you have it. Acquiesce to the fact that most people don't change and we can't control what anyone else says or does. And just reminding ourselves of that can be pretty soothing. Sometimes I'm kind of drifting into what I just said I wasn't going to do. But I am hoping my 2- and 4-year-old kids can handle an hour-plus hike in 35-degree weather that we planned so that I can see a waterfall. Because I'm really just a simple man, guys. But thanks for listening. Take care of yourself. Shoot Dr. Joanna Kujawa a message if you enjoyed this. She has so much passion and has done such great research. But sometimes it's hard to find the ones out there in the world, the audiences that it resonates with. So I'm sure she would appreciate an attaboy or an attagirl if you think that it's worthy of one. Anyway, I've done my part. Your move, goddess suppressors, technocratic cult members, and disclosure agenda deceivers. Your fucking move.
It's been too long to hurry up and wait. Some sort of big reveal should have been here by now. Are they really from space or some sort of demons? And give us some reason for all those dead cows. Disclosure's coming, so they say. The higher side chats doesn't play. Sugar-coated, give it raw and right away. Endless misdirection, never-ending search. Crack open all the archives from the lodge, the state, the church. If something cracks